Hey, what's up? It's Emilio, and this is the ASUS ROG Zephyrus G14. If you're a student, business person, or do professional work on your laptop, is this your next machine? Let's find out. Starting off with the specs, we have a 14-inch 1080p 120Hz Pantone Validated sRGB display. We have an AMD Ryzen 9 4900HS processor with a 3 GHz base clock and a 4.3 GHz all-turbo boost. And it runs at just a 35 watt TDP. For graphics, we have an Nvidia RTX 2060 Max-Q, and that runs at 65 watts. For memory, we have 16 GB of 3200 MHz DDR4 CL22 RAM. One of those sticks is user replaceable. For storage, we have a 1 TB Intel 660p NVMe drive. For the battery, we have a 76 watt-hour battery, which should get up to 10 hours of web browsing. For I/O, we have a 180 watt AC charging port, an HDMI 2.0 B port. We have two USB 3 Gen 1 ports supporting up to 5 gigabits per second. We have two USB-C Gen 2 ports with up to 10 gigabits per second. And the left side can be used for PD charging up to 65 watts, as well as DisplayPort out. For the wireless, we have Intel Wi-Fi 6 AX200 with up to 1650 megabits per second combined. For speakers, we have two 2.5 watt speakers, along with two 0.7 watt tweeters. The tweeters fire out of the top, and then the subwoofers, or the woofers, fire out of the bottom. And then for the weight, I measured this in about 3.53 pounds or about 1.6 kilograms. So jumping right into the display, we have obviously a 120 hertz panel here, and it works really well for most people. Now, if you're a competitive gamer, this does have a relatively high response time for a 120 hertz panel. You generally want to be as low as possible. Anything around 7 to 9 milliseconds would be just fine, but this is more than double that. So for competitive gamers, not the best option. So back to the 120 hertz panel. It's more important than you might think. Most laptops out that are non-gamer laptops, like let's say a Dell XPS or an HP Spectre, any other laptop that's out there has a normal 60 hertz panel. So when you're viewing content or gaming, let's say for example you're watching a 24 frames per second movie, that needs to be sent out to the display to be shown on screen, obviously. Now, when you're watching a 24 frames per second movie, notice that that doesn't fit perfectly into 60 frames per second. So 24 doesn't go into 60 perfectly. So you have to display those 24 frames 2.5 times. So what ends up happening is you have the first frame being displayed just twice, every second frame being displayed 3 times. So you notice that there's actually a bit of a judder that happens. And that's with all 24 FPS content. Now let's move on to gaming. If you're playing a game and you don't hit a perfect 60 frames per second, so the higher the refresh rate of the panel, the more options you have to be able to target for something like Freesync. You can target something like 24 frames per second all the way up to 120. Now with this panel in particular, this is an adaptive sync panel, which runs off of Freesync. Let's say in a game you can only get 59 frames per second instead of 60. So instead of having to repeat a frame or you experience some kind of a stutter in the game, instead your display will actually match the refresh rate of the content that you're watching. In 2020, if you're looking for any kind of a gaming laptop, then you definitely want something that has an adaptive sync panel or that just targets an obscenely high refresh rate like 240 or 300. The speakers are in the upper echelon of laptops that I've ever heard. I'm impressed with how clear the sound is, and the Dolby Audio is probably the only added on software for audio processing that I actually enjoy. I think it really adds to the experience and they sound nice and loud. Let's go ahead and do a quick speaker test. There's no camera, there's no webcam that's happening on the laptop. ASUS does sell one for 80 bucks. It's a little tiny clip-on camera. You can plug it into the USB port, but there is none on this computer. And that might turn a lot of business users or, college students off. I think ASUS could have just put in a tiny, crappy webcam, and I think we would have been fine. I think that would have been better than not having one at all. Onto the keyboard. It's one of the best keyboards I've ever used. It's right up there with my ThinkPad X1 Carbon, where I feel like I can just type for hours on end and I'm not getting fatigued. So for biometrics, there's one fingerprint sensor embedded in the power button, and it actually works really well, but that's only when it works. We're gonna get onto that with the issues that I've had with this laptop, which have not been many, but sometimes I feel like it just isn't waking up the fingerprint sensor. Okay, so for performance, this is one of the fastest laptops that I've ever used. It's right up there with the Intel 10th Gen 10875H processor, but with a lot less heat being produced. Considering this can be gotten for as low as $1,350 US up to $1,450, depending on if you can find it on sale or not. That is awesome performance. You pretty much cannot find an equivalently spec laptop for Intel at that price range, not even close. This is just heaps and bounds better than what you're seeing in terms of just the value that you're getting for minimum $400 less. Realistically, comparing this to like a high-end XPS or a Mac, you're saving $1,000. Now, the second part of performance is the GPU. So the RTX 2060 Max-Q is a new release from this year. The performance that you can get per watt in these systems is right up there with what you're seeing from AMD's current lineup. The Nvidia GPU that is in here doesn't get hot at all. I'm seeing temperatures no more than 70 to 75 degrees in the worst of scenarios. I managed to get 60 FPS on high settings in any modern game that I tested, whether that be Shadow of the Tomb Raider or Metro Exodus. Any game that I'm playing, I'm getting 60 frames per second minimum. Now for esports titles like CSGO, you can easily get several hundred frames per second. Overall, the level of performance we're seeing out of this is astounding, and it's rivaling laptops that we're seeing come out that cost $2,000 or $3,000 even. So here's the sort of bottom line with the GPU on this. Unless you know that you need a 2070 or a 2080, which could be the case. If you're making content on this and it's time critical content, then there is a case for a 2070 or 2080. You might be able to get a 2060 Max-Q in a device that costs only $1,000, but you're not going to get it paired with an 8-core processor that runs at 35 watts, because this is pretty much the only one that does it, in a 14-inch chassis that's as thin and light as this, that gets the kind of battery that this does. Speaking of battery life, when you're not gaming, doing normal things like web browsing, office tasks, sitting in a classroom and typing an essay, or on a train somewhere, anything that you're doing like that, you can get up to 10 hours of battery. It is very much possible, and I'm regularly seeing 8 to 10 hours of battery. Now, a new section I kind of want to put into my videos when I'm doing laptop reviews or talking about laptops in general is what's the max power that the battery can put out. And from what I'm seeing on this is you're getting about 65 watts, which means that the GPU drops a little bit, but surprisingly you get pretty awesome performance even when you're on battery. And with Nvidia's battery boost, you can probably get a couple hours of sheer gaming on this. Size and weight, like I said, this is about 3.5 pounds or about 1.6 kilograms. And if you're gonna lug around a laptop, you used to have two options. Either you need something that's thick, bulky, and just has a sheer amount of power in it, or you wanna get something that's thin and light. Something like a gaming laptop that doesn't look so unsightly is an awesome choice for people who don't need all that power, but sometimes you really do. Like, you never know what hobbies you might get into. And it's always nice to have the power when you need it. So for thermals, the cooling in the G14 is honestly pretty awesome. The only downside is I am seeing about 60 decibels of sound when I'm absolutely maxing out the fans, like if I'm trying to game and get the absolute most FPS.
Is this why the zone is off limits? I mean, with all the packs here on.
But for advanced users out there, you can actually disable all-core turbo and have this run at 3 gigahertz, and you're pretty much going to see no more than 80 degrees Celsius in terms of temperatures. And so in situations like that, you can run this as quiet as 40 decibels if you wanted to. And of course, decibels, every 10 decibels actually doubles the sound, so 60 is not double 30, it's really like 8 times louder. Okay, so for charging, most laptops, especially gaming laptops, will only give you one option for charging. And let me just tell you why this is important. In 2020, if you're looking for a laptop, the most ideal configuration, especially if you need power out of your laptop but you actually want to bring it places, is to have two options for charging. The first is with an AC adapter. ideally want something that has a nice big brick, supplies 150, 180, 300 watts, whatever the case is for the components that you have. So it's nice that in this laptop we have a 180 watt power adapter. It's going to be more than capable of powering the components in this system. But we actually have a second option. In the left side, through the USB-C port, it actually supports power delivery. And that's what you want to look for in laptops, USB-C PD charging. This one supports up to 65 watts, which is more than enough if you need to bring this to class. So look for anything that supports USB-C PD 65 watts in this laptop, and ideally for larger, bulkier laptops, the most ideal configuration is one that supports USB-C PD 100 watts. I feel like I wouldn't be doing right by this review if I didn't tell you about some downsides, of which there's a few. It hasn't been all the time. It's really less than a single % of the time I've actually used the computer have I experienced these issues. But there's been a few times where it's just been sort of annoying, and I feel like you shouldn't have to deal with some of these issues, and they should be worked out by Nvidia, AMD, ASUS, whomever. And I'll tell you about them right now. The first is that sometimes when I'm waking the computer from sleep, the fingerprint sensor doesn't work. It just doesn't wake up, and so I have to type in my password. First world problem, not a big deal, but it happens sometimes, and it's kind of annoying. You know, it's such a great fingerprint sensor when it does turn on that in those situations when it doesn't, it's just that much more annoying. Second thing, sometimes when I wake the computer up, and this has been the most rare of circumstances, you know, in the several weeks I've been using this, which by the way, thank you to my friend for letting me borrow this for a couple weeks, is that sometimes it won't actually wake up. It'll like stay on like a black screen, and it's not like the screen's off, it's like a backlit black screen. It doesn't make any sense, and so I'll actually have to reset the computer like manually, which I feel like shouldn't have to be a thing in 2020 when we have, you know, Windows 10, which should be relatively stable, and these AMD and Nvidia parts, which should be relatively stable. So I don't know what needs to be done here to fix those issues, but I do hope they get fixed. So for people who need to use this laptop, that they're not experiencing these issues intermittently. Now, I've had this other issue. I haven't experienced this in about a week, and I think it's maybe a new Nvidia graphics driver, but I've actually run out of GPU memory in situations where I feel like I really shouldn't have. But the point is, I've run out of it, and what happens is your computer freezes up, and the only thing I can do is sign out to get everything to start working again, which is kind of annoying. And that happened in DaVinci Resolve and when I was playing Wolfenstein 2. Other than that, I haven't really had that issue. And then the last issue is, it took me the better part of a half hour just to get Shadow of the Tomb Raider working. I don't know what happened there, if it was a graphics driver issue or what, but I had to toggle on and off settings for about a half hour for it to just start up. Once it started up, I have not had that issue since, but just a weird glitch, I guess. I don't know if it's an AMD thing or what's happening there, but. So again, these issues are all software related, and this computer's been out now for a couple months or so. And so maybe they're gonna get ironed out over the next couple months, but I think it's high in time that ASUS issues some updates for the laptop, just for the software fixes, because these are things that can be fixed. I don't think it's like a hardware issue, and sort of sullies the experience when it otherwise would have been a perfect laptop experience in my theoretical search for laptop nirvana. So for conclusions, AMD, at least for the next few months, are only going to be releasing laptops with their CPUs in them that run up to a 2060 or a 2060 Max-Q. We're not going to see 2070s and 2080s. So really for high-end professionals and high-end gamers, this or any AMD laptop is just not going to cut it. And I really think that's because they only have so many resources. And while people watch YouTube videos on $2,000 or $3,000 laptops, the reality is a lot of people are going to be trying to stick around that $1,000, maximum $1,500 price range. And a lot of people are trying to pay less. And that's where AMD is really trying to shine. They're trying to provide as much value and as much performance as possible for right around that $750 to $1,500 range. And in that range, they are kicking ass. And so that's probably most likely why we're not seeing 2070s and 2080s in laptops, at least not right now. Supposedly in the fall, we're going to see those laptops start to emerge. But at least for now, this is pretty much the best that you're going to get in terms of pricing, performance, portability, aesthetics. And as a side note, I see this online all the time. There seems to be like a disdain for Intel, and I will readily admit that I participated in this in my last couple videos. But I really want to make this clear. Intel is not all bad. there are some key advantages that Intel processors have that AMD laptops cannot compete with. First thing, the number of PCIe lanes. There's only 12 in any of the configurations that you can get on an AMD laptop processor. Intel has 16 PCIe lanes, so this limits the amount of expansion that you can have and have things all working at once to communicate with the CPU. Thunderbolt. USB 4 and Thunderbolt 4 might be something where we see them become incorporated in AMD laptops, but right now the highest speed laptop that you can find out there is a max USB-C port with 10 gigabits per second. Not too bad, but when you compare it to Intel that has Thunderbolt 3 ports, you can run an eGPU or storage, audio, video equipment, monitors, etc. So overall, I'd recommend this computer. If you're trying to go a little bit lower, there's also some great options. ASUS has a couple. There's even a lower price version of the G14 that cuts out a couple specs. So that's all I have for you for this video. Feel free to drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe, all that great stuff. But really, I want to know what you think of the G14. I know a lot of us are stuck at home, working from home, school from home, whatever the case may be. If you're looking for a laptop, are you considering something like this? Have you even heard of it? Or what are you looking at right now? I genuinely want to know. Well, until then, I will see you in the next video. Peace out. And then one thing I forgot to mention, if you're still, for some reason, watching, another key difference between AMD laptops and Intel laptops, which might not be a deal breaker, but I think it's pretty important, is the internal graphics card. On thin and light laptops, you actually have faster integrated graphics than you do on high-end Intel laptops, approximately 2 or 3 times faster than high-end Intel laptops. So think about when you're on battery just doing normal web browsing, the smoothness of that experience, the resolution of the video that you can watch without having to use that high power, high performing graphics card. Integrated graphics is important. I might do a whole video on this, but the point is it's often overlooked. Also, Nvidia GPU is not directly connected to the display, although it is directly connected to the display port out through the USB-C port. So if you hook it up to a monitor, you will maximize your performance, but if you're playing on the laptop's display, again, because this supports FreeSync, you're not gonna get quite the max performance, but I think it's a fine trade-off considering you get FreeSync and adaptive sync, so something to keep in mind.